their seats. Ladies and gentlemen, requesting all of you to please be seated as we move on to the next session of the day. All right, on to another session where you will have a very engaging conversation, I'm sure. We know that history documents the events that have brought us to our present, but whose perspective does it present? Does it need to be revisited to include different points of view? Or should some things be absolutely beyond modifications? Our next session dwells on exactly that. Please extend a warm welcome to our speakers for this session. Academic and author Makarand R Paranjape and Sudheendra Kulkarni, author and socio-political activist. Once again, I'd like to request Mr. Vir Sanghvi to join us on stage to chair this session. Mr. Sanghvi. Mr. Sanghvi, please join us on stage. Please do extend a warm welcome to our speakers once again, Makarand R Paranjape and Sudheendra Kulkarni.
It doesn't matter, yeah? Ladies and gentlemen, hello again. It's like I never left. We're going to do this session slightly differently from the last one, is that I'm going to ask each of the speakers to first make a brief opening remark to set the agenda, so that they don't have two separate agendas, as has sometimes happened in this session, in these sessions. So, Makarand, you want to start? Or Sudheen, who wants to start?
Seniority.
Seniority, that's you, no? All right, killers. You don't look that old.
No,
Yeah.
goes back to the what?
Yeah, I don't know, I'm joking. So, Sudheen, you want to start? Have they given you a mic? I don't think they've given you. Take mine.
So thank you, Vir, and good morning to all of you. I'm very happy to be participating in this session along with Professor Makarand Paranjape, for whom I have a lot of respect. I'm a little intrigued by the title of this particular session, Excavating the Past. You know, excavating the past is something that's for archaeologists, not for historians, not for media persons, not for certainly not for public intellectuals, politicians, even though some politicians in India are indeed busy in excavating the past. So for their benefit, and also to initiate my own thoughts on this subject, I would like to quote from the ideological guru of the Bharatiya Janata Party, who was also the guru of its previous avatar, the Bharatiya Janasangh, Deen Dayal Upadhyay. Pandit Deen Dayal Upadhyay I regard as one of the most important political gurus of India. Unfortunately, the Congress and the left, and we have a very eminent Congress leader here, Shashi ji. I must say that the Congress party and the left parties, intellectuals, have not really cared to study Pandit Deen Dayal Upadhyay. And unfortunately, even the BJP today pays lip service to Deen Dayal Upadhyay, but not following his thoughts, his guidance, And therefore, let me read a few lines from his seminal book, Integral Humanism, Ekatma Manav Darshan. He says, we have taken due note of our ancient culture, but we are not archaeologists, which means that we are not in the job of excavating the past. We have no intention to become the custodians of a vast archaeological museum. We have no intention to become the custodians of a vast archaeological museum. Our goal is not merely to protect the culture, but to revitalize it, so as to make it dynamic and in tune with the times. Now, he goes on to say, in introducing his philosophy of integral humanism, on the basis of integral humanism, we shall be able to reconcile nationalism, democracy, socialism, and world peace with the traditional values of Bharatiya culture, and think of all these ideals in an integrated form. The mutual conflict among these ideals can be removed and they can supplement mutually. Thereby, the man, that's man with capital M, can gain his lost status and attain the aims of his life. You know, what a profound thought here by none other than the ideological guru of the Bharatiya Janata Party, where he says, democracy, socialism, world peace, they all can be reconciled. Now, what we need today, Vir, is politics of reconciliation, politics of samvad and samanvay. Unfortunately, those who take the name of Deen Dayal Upadhyay are today in the business of excavating the past, creating controversies, some artificial controversies, saying that this is true India, this is not true India, these are true Indians, these are not true Indians. This is true Indian religion, this is not true Indian religion. Whereas India, throughout its history, has always welcomed every culture, every religion, every race, and made its own. And this politics of division, polarization, we have seen most recently, where one important political leader had the audacity to say that this election is about 80% versus 20%. And he went on to win the election and become the chief minister of the state once again. Now, this is not the kind of India, you know, this whole summit is about ideas of India. There may be many ideas of India, and there should be conversation among various ideas of India. But this polarizing idea, 80% versus 20%, has absolutely no place in any idea of India, and it must be rejected.
You want to do this, Makarand? Okay.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. I want to thank the ABP group, Kaveri, and of course, it's a great privilege to be on this panel. I will return the compliment that was paid to me by Sudheendra ji at the beginning by pointing to a wonderful book he wrote. I think it's called Mahatma Gandhi. It's called The Music of the Spinning Wheel, if I remember it right. Music of the Spinning Wheel, Mahatma Gandhi's manifesto for the internet. I think it came out about 10 years ago. So it's a great privilege to be on this panel. The thing I want to say at the beginning is that I believe I am the only bona fide academic in this entire conclave. There are other PhDs. My very distinguished senior from college, Dr. Shashi Tharoor, is a PhD too, but I'm the only one, I believe, who earns his living by teaching, reading, writing, and thinking, which is all I've done in my life. I want to return to the topic of this session, Vir, which is about, history. And I agree with Sudheendra ji when he said the topic suggests archaeology and not history. excavation is an archaeological term. I'll come to that later. But ladies and gentlemen, what we witness in India today is that we are in the middle of a history war, okay? And the war over history, over the past of India, is actually a subset or a part of the larger cultural wars of India. And the thing that we have to notice is that in this panel itself, there are no historians. I'm a student of literature, literary texts, and that's very important. I'll tell you why, because histories are also narratives. You know, they have heroes, they have villains, they have a plot. But why is it that there are no historians? It's because history is too important to be left to historians today. And the discipline of history itself is beleaguered. And historians are running helter-skelter. They don't want to be under attack for being aligned with one side or the other, because the discipline of history is a very professional and extremely rarefied discipline, right? And it has its gatekeepers, and it has its, again, you know, prejudices. And I can tell you, as somebody who teaches at JNU, I happen to be one of the senior professors in JNU, for the last 30, 40 years, JNU kept out a certain kind of history altogether. That is what our history wars are about. And I can refer you to a book by our former High Commissioner in Pakistan, TCA Raghavan, Dr. TCA Raghavan, another JNU alumni, called History Men. It's about 3 famous historians of India, Jadunath Sarkar, G.S. Sardesai, and Raghubir Singh. So the history wars are not recent. They go back in time. And if you go over the last 20, 30 years, the alternate voices that were kept out, like Sitaram Goel, Ram Swarup, Dharampal, and even today, the people who are writing the histories which are more, you might say, controversial, if not more apropos to our times, like my friend Vikram Sampath, they're not within the academy. So these voices have been kept out. The reason for this is that the discipline of history runs in terms of schools. Historiography, that's the writing of history, is governed by some principles. Like you had the colonial school inaugurated by James Mill, the father of John Stuart Mill. Then you have the nationalist school of history. Perhaps it was inaugurated by Savarkar, his first war of independence, which he wrote in 1909, the same year Gandhiji wrote Hind Swaraj. So it's an interesting dialogue about the different ideas of India. Going back to 1909 and 10, both books were banned, okay? And then you had the Marxist, the nationalist school, Jadunath Sarkar, G.S. Sardesai, Raghubir Singh, but later, very distinguished historians like R.C. Majumdar. And then you had the leftist school, which turned into the subalternist school. And now we are at the cusp of history, where I think we have a Hindutva school of history, which is obviously, again, possibly under attack from some sides. And it's also defended. I'm just told that Vikram sold the film rights of his book on Savarkar, 2-volume book, which was also attacked by another bunch of people for citation inadequacy. I'll use a polite term. So all I'm trying to say is that we are in the middle of this kind of cultural war, a subset of which is the history war. And though I'm not a historian, I also have written a history of our times, which is called JNU Nationalism and India's Uncivil War. And this is exactly what Sudheendraji started off with. And I'm going to come back, dial back to his comment. I think whatever may work for politics, call it 80-20, bulldozer, but as far as civil society is concerned, the dialogue of decency with which Mr. Pandey began yesterday is what we stand for. Because without that dialogue of decency, I think our democracy itself is under threat. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. That was stirring stuff, and in your case, very academic and interesting. Now let's cut to the chase, shall we? When we talk about history, there are basically two areas of conflict. One is the freedom struggle. He referred to Vikram's book about Savarkar as to whether the Congress and Nehru was unduly praised and whether other people were come out. Yes, have been left out. That's one controversy. The other one is the one you referred to, which is this 80-20 business. That the notion that history has unfairly praised invaders, people who came into India only to subjugate us, and played down the aspirations of the original inhabitants of India, which is the Hindus. Now, this has many, many schools of sub-thought, one of them being this whole Aryan-Dravidian controversy, another being the Indus Valley situation. Were these people really Aryans, were they not? But essentially, it all boils down to, is everyone an Indian, or were some people invaders who remained invaders? Do you want to comment on that?
There is not a single Indian who is an alien Indian. Everyone is an equal Indian, whether they're Hindus, Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Congress, RSS, BJP, left, all are Indians and all are equal Indians. Of course, in our history, we've had invaders. They plundered. They caused a lot of destruction. They also, some of them came with a superiority complex. But it is India's innate quality, strength, that it has assimilated all of them. Be they Muslims. Of course, a majority of Muslims were not outsiders at all. They are native Indians. But all those who came from outside, they became part of India, Indian culture, Indian soil. Babur may have been an invader, but Bahadur Shah Zafar was as Indian as Jhansi ki Lakshmi Bai. We must accept this, because he actually led the first war of independence against the British. So how can we say that this 20% is not Indian or less Indian? This divisive politics must end.
Do you think there's a danger that, because you refer to 80-20 again, there's this desire to create a rift in current society, we go back to the past and we rearrange it to justify current political agendas?
See, we must, of course, study history, because if we don't study history, we are vulnerable to committing the mistakes of the past. We must know why, for example, we were enslaved. Why we were enslaved by the British? Because of our own weaknesses, because of our own disunity. So studying history is, of course, extremely important. But how do we study history? Do we study history to excavate the past, create controversies that divide our society today? And if we divide our society today, if we divide our politics today, if we divide our governance today, India is going to be weak. And there are so many challenges India is facing. Unless we unite, our society is united, our politics is united, our governance is united, how are we going to face these huge challenges? Challenges of poverty, underdevelopment, deprivation, and of course, our problems with some of our neighbors. So we need unity, and for unity, we must approach history critically, but with a constructive mind.
Aren't you, in a sense, doing exactly what the Hindutva-walas are accused of? The Hindutva-walas are accused of using history to suit political agendas. You want to go back and say history should be used to take India forward. I mean, history is history. You can't use it for any political agenda, whether it's taking India forward or dividing India. Shouldn't you just tell the truth?
No. You see, we must... I'm one of who does not condemn Hindutva as a fascist force. Hindutva also belongs to India, although I may disagree with some aspects, many aspects of Hindutva, but the fact of the matter is, it is as integral to India as any other ideology. What we need is a civil dialogue, conversation between the forces of Hindutva and the opponents of Hindutva. And in this, we must recognize that there are certain genuine reasons why in the Hindu society, there is a certain discontent, there is a certain angst, and those causes have to be understood, recognized, and corrected. And something which, unfortunately, the Congress and the left parties did not do. The left, of course, did not understand, even today does not understand Hinduism. It rejects Hinduism, and that's why it has become marginal to India's politics and India's society. And these mistakes have to be corrected. At the same time, there are forces in the Hindutva camp which have become fanatical, fundamentalists. They are in fact committing the same mistakes as the ideologies that they are opposing. If Islamist fanaticism is wrong, similarly Hindutva fanaticism is also wrong.
Okay. Let's get on to history now. You gave us a perspective. You talked about leftist historians. You talked about the development of the subaltern school. And you said perhaps a new Hindutva school is emerging. I think that's a very interesting perspective. The difference, I think people would argue, is that leftist historians did it because they actually believed in the dictatorship of the proletariat and the class war being the reason for everything. Subalterns really believe that it was the people at the bottom whose story should be told. The argument against Hindutva historians is that they're doing it to serve a political agenda, that the leftists never hope to win an election. The Hindutva guys, by rewriting history, will win elections. How do you respond to that?
You know, Vir, as you said, history is history, let it be. But history is not history. It's always about the present.
Yeah.
You go back to the past in order to influence the present. So the history wars are not about the past. They're really about the present ideas of India.
Yeah.
Now, the way I understand the Hindutva school is that it is, you know, first of all, let's also see that the Tva Pratyaya, Hindu, and then you say Tva. Tva means Tattva. So even Hindutva, as Sudheendra ji said, need not be divisive because each one can have their own idea of Hinduness. There's no uniformity there. There cannot be an imposition that this idea of Hindutva is the only official one, because that would be like a new papal bull or an imprimatur, which we cannot have. Whether it's the idea of Hinduism, whether it's the idea of India, it's always going to be plural. Now, it's not that all Hindutva historians are only trying to win elections. No. From their point of view, they are actually opening up the field like the subalterns did.
Yeah.
What do they mean by that? They are saying that when you look at the history of independent India, it was a Congress-sponsored project which promoted only Mahatma Gandhi as a token, and then the Nehru family. So when you said all Indians are equal, they would say that the people who contributed to the freedom struggle, it was a constellation, okay? It was not like the Ramayana model, one hero, one narrative, one villain. It was like the Mahabharata model, Bahuvachan, you know? It was of many heroes and of many heroines. So the Hindutva historians are saying, look, Bhagat Singh hasn't got his due, Savarkar hasn't got his due, Birsa Munda hasn't got his due, so-and-so hasn't got his due, Rajguru hasn't got his due. So what about all these people? Why are we not telling their stories? So one part of their enterprise is just to tell the stories that were not yet told. But there's a difference between popular history, okay, and academic history. So the Hindutva school has not produced that many significant academic historians as yet. Apart from, Vikram, the one person that I think, though I'm not sure she'd like to be called a Hindutva historian, is Shonalika Kaul, who's now at JNU. And she's written on the Raja Tarangini. The point I'm trying to make, Vir, is that history is a very recent form of epistemology. That is a way of understanding and organizing and ordering the past. There are many other forms: cultural memory, folk memory, bardic songs, you know. For example, Prithviraj Raso. Prithviraj lost to Muhammad Ghori, but there is no bardic account or epic on Muhammad Ghori. The epic is on Prithviraj Chauhan, though he lost, and it's elegiac. You know, it's a sad epic, like Padmavat, written by Jaisi, a Muslim person, 200, 300 years later. So people remember their past in many ways, and history is just one way. We call it itihas, but itihas will not be considered modern history. So in other words, legend, myths, memories, family narratives, and then macro histories, continental histories, you know, and micro histories, institutional history. My book is an institutional history. It's just a history of the last 5 years of JNU, what happened there. So history is a very wide discipline, but we cannot negate all these other ways of remembering the past. Okay. And this is what the earlier people did. They called it unripe cognition of people who don't know. You know, like these are superstitious people, and they have these legends and myths, but not so. You know, every part of India, they'll say, oh, Bhim came here, Arjun went by here, Krishna slept under this grove. No, that is the part of the sacred geography and cultural memory of India, and it's not just of Hinduism. Look at all the Sufi shrines, the Chishtiya Silsila. I was once mapping it. It starts somewhere in Central Asia, then it crosses what is now Afghanistan and Pakistan, and then Ajmer and all that, and down south you have Gesudaraz Dargah. There's a sacred geography there as well. So the only point that we are making is that the official histories are not the only ways of reconstructing the past. And when you open the door and when you don't cancel these other narratives, you get a richer understanding of who you are.
Yeah, I don't think anybody I certainly would not dispute anything you said. But there are criticisms. The one Shashi Tharoor made at the last session, which is in response to Jagdeep Dhankad, which is, all right, you can say the International Congress has dominated the narrative, but the truth is the Hindu Mahasabha, the RSS, were not really a major part of the freedom struggle. So one motive of the Hindutva school is basically rewrite history to promote these people. That's one criticism. The second criticism is one Sudhin made, which is that the intention is to rewrite history to portray Muslims as invaders to suit the agenda of the present. And the third, and that's my question, is I accept what you're saying about there being a richness of ways of looking at history, and we're not a communist country with just one kind of history. But my question is, will you rewrite school textbooks? What will you teach your children?
That's a very good question. I'll come to the last point later. Yeah. I want to come to the second point first.
Okay.
You see, the argument is that the medieval period when India was invaded and conquered, and it starts way back, you know, within 40 years of the Prophet's death, Baluchistan and Sindh had already been conquered by Muhammad bin Qasim, and another 500 years it took. And there is a story of the resistance to these conquests, okay? 500 years of resistance before Muhammad Ghori conquered Delhi in about 1190, 1191, Second Battle of Taneshwar. So the argument, and this is not made by these latest Hindutva types, these arguments have been made by Sitaram Goel, Ram Swarup, and many others who were completely silenced, marginalized, never allowed to get jobs. You see, there's a racket to keep out people, okay? Because, you know, you train your students, the students get jobs. So there was a patronage system. So the point is, the brutality of the conquest of India, the destruction of the monuments and the temples, the loot, all of this was airbrushed, okay? Now, we can't write revenge histories, I completely agree. Yeah. But, you know, the very historians of the Muslim period, they have been blanked out. So these things have to be told so that we have a truth and reconciliation type of movement within India, not denial. We have to know what happened. You go to any museum in any part of the world which has Indian art, every image will be disfigured. So somebody did it, right? And there was an ideology which sanctioned that kind of vandalism, and we saw it in our own times with the destruction of the priceless Bamiyan Buddhas. But it's politically...
And the Babri Masjid, which you have
and the
not
Babri
mentioned. Which you
Masjid.
have not
Well,
mentioned,
it's incorrect to say. There are 100 books on the Babri Masjid, okay? But you can't talk about the other side. So that has to change. Now, coming to textbooks. See, personally, controlling the narrative never works, okay? Because the internet is a source of so much information. And I always say that don't have one official answer. This is the problem. If you look at the NCERT textbooks, they are full of so much distortion.
Give me an example of the kind of distortion.
Well, they are not going to tell you, for example, how Somnath was destroyed. They are not going to talk about Qutub Minar being a victory tower built on the ruins of 27 temples. They'd never talk about these things. Now, I don't believe in writing revenge histories, but our kids are bright enough. But I think we still are completely entrapped in the top-down approach. And the history wars are not going to end soon. I can assure you that. And the only other thing I wanted to say, apropos your opening point, that the Congress-dominated narrative, which, flourished in India for 60, 70 years, was very divisive. It was the same divide et impera narrative that we inherited from the British. Some people jokingly call it the Bharat Todo narrative, where, caste, creed, community, region, language, religion were all causes of identity politics and separatism. You talked about unity, Sudheendra ji talked about unity, and you cannot create a great nation merely on divisive and identity politics-driven narratives. And this is where we have an opportunity, because we have to tell people that when Rana Pratap fought Akbar, Akbar had Rajput generals fighting on his side, and Rana Pratap had Muslim generals fighting on his side. Shivaji had Muslim soldiers. Baji Rao, the forces against Ahmad Shah Abdali. There was a very important guy called Ibrahim Khan Gardi who died in Panipat. He used to work for the Nizam. He started working for the Peshwas. So I completely agree that you can't construct the entire history of India as a Hindu versus Muslim. No. But this rich complexity can only come when you see, all these nuances. You had Naga Babas fighting. In the Battle of Panipat, you had all kinds of people. We've forgotten all of them. Jadonath Sarkar has talked about the Nagas, who were a tremendous fighting force, and it's the British who disarmed them. Yeah. So I'm saying the colonization of India, according to the Congress narrative, was only 200 years ago, and it was a European colonization. The colonization of India is much older. So we have to see the past in a more critical and open light, to see that we are even today in the midst of a civilizational war. You don't like people saying this, but look at the number of Hindu shrines destroyed in Kashmir. Forget about Pakistan and Bangladesh. In Kashmir, which is a part of India, it's documented. Okay, that's not a nice thing.
I have 4 minutes left, so I'm going to stop you. Sudhin, is it not true that there was a tacit understanding among the intellectual elite that where there was barbarity, where there was destruction of Hindu shrines, etc., by the medieval invaders, we played this down. And we played it down because we thought it might lead to tensions, that today's Muslims have nothing to do with that they will end up being held responsible. He's saying break that consensus, let the truth come out because it's history. How do you respond?
I agree with him that the wrongs in the past must not be airbrushed, must not be denied. Yeah. At the same time, don't blame today's Muslims for the wrongs committed by a few invaders or fanatical rulers centuries ago. We are doing it even now. Take the example of Kashmir files. Kashmir files about what happened in Kashmir. But all over the country, there is a systematic campaign to blame and malign Muslims everywhere. And even in Kashmir itself, Muslims also have suffered. And Muslims in many places, they saved Kashmiri Pandits. So what I'm saying is,
Yeah.
while we must be truthful to history, there are ways and ways of looking at history. If history is used to divide today's society, then it is pernicious. But if history is studied in order to understand the mistakes committed by anybody, it may be Muslims, Hindus, anybody, then it's a way of going in the direction of reconciliation. What we need today...
Yeah, I don't think he dispute any of that. Can I just ask? But what I'm saying is, his point is, of course, don't exploit history to create rifts between communities, but tell the truth. Do you disagree with that?
Absolutely. It's the task of historians to be truthful to history, but it's the task of politicians not to use history for their own divisive ends. Let me give an example.
Yeah, go on.
You see, the subtitle of this particular session is Change or Continuity.
Yeah.
Now, I don't believe in change or continuity. The principle that has guided India's history, 5,000-year history, is change and continuity. Change with continuity. But what is being done? We are being told that true freedom for India came in 2014. Complete denial of all that happened
but only by Kangana Ranaut. But only by Kangana Ranaut, not by any serious historian.
She's a heroine. She's an iconic figure now for a whole ecosystem of the ruling party. Can it be denied? So what we are doing in the process is that India, of course, there are many shortcomings of India after 1947, but generations of Indians, they contributed to building a modern India, laying the foundation for a democratic India, a self-reliant India. All that is being denied, and everything started in 2014.
Okay.
So continuity is, discarded, and as if change happened only in 2014. This is great disservice to history and also great disservice to India.
You want to respond? It has to be closing comments. We have 25 seconds left.
I know, except the earlier session just went on and on. So if all are equal, then it's not fair that governors...
I won't interrupt. Finish what you're saying. I'll be fair.
Okay. I just want to say that the burden and responsibility of reconciliation and peace cannot be entirely on the shoulders of the Hindus. Why doesn't the Muslim ulema in India have a conclave like this and unequivocally condemn the vandalism, the destruction, the loot, as well as the attack on Indian civilization? They can't do it. They won't do it. If they did it, I would bow down to them, because a lot of it was theologically sanctioned. And these are the elephants in the room that we don't want to touch, because they said that...
Makarand, you're serious? At a time when Muslims are under attack, being made to feel like outsiders in their own country, being, as he said, lynched because of Kashmir files, you want them to hold a conclave and say, guys, we are very sorry, we did very bad things? I mean, is this your solution?
No, my point is, they don't have to say sorry for what their ancestors may have done.
Okay.
But they should come out and say, we don't like this. We don't like just as we don't like Babri Masjid being felled, we don't like the hundreds and thousands of temples destroyed, including the Gyan Gyapi.
Look, I'm sure there are many Muslims in this audience. Not one of them says, go and destroy temples. Why do you want to humiliate them and make them say it?
Vir, 1 minute. You're distorting what I said, with due respect to you.
All right, go on.
It's one thing for a so-called secular Muslim to say that privately. The moment they get up and say it publicly, they lose face.
I love the phrase, so-called secular Muslim. Are you saying there are no secular Muslims?
No, look, I'm saying that Arif Muhammad Khan Saab can say it.
Oh, he certainly is so-called secular Muslim. Yes,
well, we're diverting. I'm saying let the ulama come out.
So are you saying only the clergy should do this?
At least the clergy should say, we are opposed to this. We don't like the destruction of the shrines of other people. Let them say it. They won't say it.
But assume they say it, then what?
Then we'll congratulate them. That'll be the beginning of a Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
Okay. All right. So you're saying it's a first step to the way to
see, both sides have to take first steps.
All right. Okay. Fair enough. Okay.
Under Gandhi
I'm not sure I agree, but I respect that argument. Okay. Do you agree with him? that for a reconciliation, this whole argument that because Hindus are in the majority, we must airbrush out whatever happened in the past has not worked. Let the Muslim ulema, because a lot of this was religious and clergy sanctioned, come out and say this was wrong, and let's move forward in the spirit of reconciliation. That's what you're saying, right?
Of course, every community must be truthful to history, including Muslims. If in the name of Islam, wrongs have been committed, it is the duty of the Muslim religious leaders, social leaders, political leaders to say it is wrong. Even today, in our own times, Islam has been misused for extremism, terrorism. This must be condemned in the strongest possible terms by Muslim ulama, and many of them are indeed doing so.
Okay.
But common Muslims must not be held responsible.
I think
for
he agrees.
this.
I think he agrees with
And
that.
that is precisely what is being done. And
Okay.
it is the responsibility of Prime Minister of India to condemn this. He has not done it so far.
And he's not going to, let's be honest. But I think we have a degree of agreement here. The agreement is that we must tell the truth about history. It's not our job to rewrite it for political reasons, for whatever your ideology. That there must be reconciliation between communities, that the reconciliation must come from both sides, and the use of history to fight the battles of the present, particularly exploit alleged atrocities against Hindus, that must be condemned, because history is to tell us who we are, not make us fight with each other. Do we both agree with that? Yes?
If by way of a concluding remark, I may say something?
Yeah, okay. Remember, we are now 3 minutes over already, so make it a brief concluding, yeah.
We have talked so much about the past. The past is, of course, important, but the past must not be excavated.
Okay.
The past must be studied with openness, candor, truthfulness. But we are more interested in future. We should not be past obsessed. We should be future focused.
Okay.
And therefore, I'm reminded of what Maharshi Aurobindo says. Pride in the past, concern for the future, but lofty dreams for the future. Concern for the present and lofty dreams for the future. It is future that we should be more concerned about. We should discuss more about future, and that lofty dreams for the future can only be realized if we are united as Indians, 130, 140 crore Indians, irrespective of ideology, irrespective of religion. We are one people, and especially, today, the party perhaps you sympathize with is in power. What India needs is cutting across political divide, samvad, samanvay, and sahyog between all political parties to create this lofty future for India.
1 minute, okay, just 1 minute, okay.
Thank you, Sudheendraji. You're more idealistic than I expected for a person who has been in politics for so long. I'm afraid when it comes to politics and political parties, it's going to be a battle that will continue.
Yeah.
And no side is holier than the other, I'm afraid. They'll use politics to stay in power. You know it better than me. But as members of civil society, I completely agree with you. You started with Deen Dayal Upadhyay. You ended with Sri Aurobindo. I couldn't agree more. It's his 150th anniversary. I completely agree with you that we can't be stuck in the past. But I can only say one thing. The road to the future lies through the past. We can't be stuck in the past, but we have to revisit the past to understand what happened to India. But really, this is a time for new creation, to use Sri Aurobindo's phrase. And I think there's never been a better time for India than I can think of in the last 1,000 years, economically, politically, socially, intellectually. But the point is that we have to leave politics to politicians. And as members of civil society, regardless of our affiliations, we must work for those values which make this republic great: decency, dignity, equality of all citizens, dialogue, and democracy. Thank you.
So final message from this session: leave history to historians. There will be differing views in history. Accept that. But the moment politicians get involved in history, that's where the problems begin. Yeah? Thank you all. Thank you, Sudheen. Thank you, Makarand.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sanghvi, for facilitating that conversation, and or to our speakers, requesting you to please stay on stage as I invite Kanak Singh Rana, Director, GTPL, and Kavita Dasan, Vice President, People Practice at ABP Network, to please join us on stage and present our esteemed guests with a memento of our gratitude.